Slant fuel number 4. I mean, the place blew up. I mean, seriously, they're showing you photos. Now, if they did put it back together, why would they put it back together? The place is going to be decommissioned. They're not going to spend $5-10 million to put a fake scene up. Number 2, that reactor exists, I'm going to say, 23 other places in America alone. So you don't even have to film it there. You could go film it in America. You could film it. Japan's got a bunch of them. These GEs are all over. Okay, you could make this film almost anywhere. And then, green screens. I mean, seriously, CNN is like the green screen king, queen, whatever you want to call it. Cooper Anderson, he's done green screens, and they've been caught before. So it's really hard to believe things that you see, especially with people in places. And the place, first of all, the place exploded and blew up. I mean, when you have that type of meltdown and that type of disaster, you're not going to go into it right away. I mean, they're still cleaning the place up, and there was all types of temperatures that were used, different types of isotopes. So, I mean, they picked up isotopes miles and miles away from Japan that would require Celsius scales of 4,800 degrees. I mean, we're talking full-blown meltdowns here, not to mention all the alpha and betas, even the low-temperature isotopes, which blew all over America, and they just happened not to test, the sensors until their half-lives were over, because they all had short half-lives. So I would have to say that, I have a hard time believing that they're actually in that reactor. I believe it's either green screen. Now let's say they made a mock-up and they fixed it. Why would they do that? There's no reason to set that up with fake fuel rods. Seriously, fake fuel rods, they're not going to do that. They're just going to go to another room. And I'll tell you what, these producers and these people that do news for you, they have no empathy. They are paid to say, if they don't say what they're paid to do, they're not going to have a job. Okay, they're going to say what the teleprompter tells them to do, and they have no problem with that. So I have a hard time with some of the footage that is on the mainstream, and actually it doesn't even matter. I think what they're trying to do is distract you with this. The real problem isn't this at all. The real problem is that the place was built into a hillside. Seriously, who would build a nuclear reactor facility at sea level? You have to be kind of a moron to do this. And so all that water's coming through that mountain. Where do you think it's going? Underneath it. And what's down there? A bunch of melted cores. These things are melting, and the water's getting radioactive. I mean, seriously, the fish are all dying. I mean, they don't report on all their dead whales. This week alone, there was a couple hundred dead whales in New Zealand. What about the 10,000 dead sea lions? Nobody talked about them. They don't show you all the dead fish, the die-offs, and I will bet there's hardly any fish near Fukushima. I mean, it's continually millions of gallons of radioactive water is seeping into the Pacific. That's the real problem. And the other problem is that they totally annihilated us with a plume, a gaseous radioactive substance that dropped all over America that they didn't even properly monitor. Half the monitors were turned off. The monitors that were mobile just happened to be in the shop. And then they took out all the filters, and these filters were actually picking up the alpha and beta of, iodine, plutonium, these other isotopes that have half-lives of 30 to 60 days. They didn't even test those until like 6, 8, 10 months later, when there was nothing left of the isotope. In the meantime, our cows ate the food. We drank their milk. We ate their food because it all dumped on us. That's the real problem. It's not this reactor TV show they're showing us. The real problem is that it's destroying the Earth right now. It's destroying our ocean right now. And we were test specimens in 2011 and 2012, and all of America and Canada was whacked by alpha and beta radioactive radiation that damaged us. And that is the real issue. As far as the rods, seriously, a lot of things could happen. Number one, they could have just totally vaporized. I mean, they found certain isotopes that require 5,000-6,000 Celsius degree isotopes miles and miles away. So they could have just vaporized. By the way, when they do vaporize into a gaseous state, a lot of these sensors we have all over, especially in America, don't pick up the radioactive gas. They pick up the zoomies that actually hit it, the particles. So it could have vaporized, okay? And if it didn't vaporize, then they melted. If they melted, where are they? Well, they could be in the earth melting right now. There could be this big, massive glob of metal, radioactive substance that's trying to be cooled down by millions of gallons of water coming from the mountain because these idiots put a nuclear power plant at sea level that cut a mountain out. All that water's going underneath, killing the fish like we talked about. So that's where your rods are at. What do you think, they'd put them somewhere into another reactor? Well, if they did, they would say, well, we're storing them temporarily. I mean, they don't even have any room to store stuff. Why do you think there's 31 million bags of 1-ton bags all over the country? If they had room to store rods, they'd be on site. No, man, these rods are gone. These rods have been vaporized, or they're in the ground melting, or they're hiding them somewhere and basically killing people with the radiation. I mean, have you seen how many people are working there? I hate to see the death rates 10 years from now from all the workers there. It's insane. It's insane. It's insane.
There were hydrogen explosions at reactors number 1 and number 3, and there was a fire at reactor number 4. There is no mistake that this is a level that can have an effect on humans.
A fourth reactor is also right now under concern. This reactor was shut down at the time of the earthquake. What we believe at this time is that there has been a hydrogen explosion in this unit due to an uncovering of the fuel in the fuel pool. We believe that secondary containment has been destroyed, and there is no water in the spent fuel pool.
Let me assure you, the situation is under control.
December 1st, 2018. This video is called Fukushima Unit 4 Spent Fuel Pool Charade. Now, the reason why I call it a charade, because just look at the definition. Now, all I gotta say is, do you believe TEPCO or don't you believe TEPCO? I don't believe TEPCO. And if you don't, then I ask the question, if the spent fuel pool caught fire, even a little bit, how do you pull out spent fuel rods that were on fire? Wouldn't they be stuck together? Now, they say 100% of it went up into the air, according to the censored report. Now, if it's all gone and burnt up, why are they saying that they pulled 1,500 of them out? And if they did,
where are they?
Workers will begin removing fuel rods on Monday at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. This is the first critical step in what is to become a decades-long decommissioning process. Tokyo Electric Power Company workers will launch the operation from the number 4 reactor building. There are more than 1,500 assemblies of fuel rods in the building. Most of them are used and highly radioactive. The building was damaged by a hydrogen explosion in March 2011. The workers will use a crane attached to a specially built structure. Each worker is only allowed to work for 2 hours a day because of the high radiation levels in the building. A manager told NHK World that TEPCO is confident the operation can be carried out safely.
The same operation has been conducted more than 1,200 times at nuclear plants, including other facilities. We're not trying anything new. Experienced workers will do what they have been doing for years.
TEPCO officials say it will take more than a year to remove all the fuel rods from the building. The workers will then have to remove the fuel rods from 3 other reactor buildings. They estimate that the entire decommissioning process will take up to 40 years.
So the official story of spent fuel pool number 4 is that it did not burn. That's TEPCO's official story. Now, at the time, Unit 4, they took out all the assemblies and put them in the spent fuel pool. They contained 1,331 assemblies, and they were at 97% occupancy, fuel rack occupancy, so it was stuffed to the gill. Here's where the spent fuel pool is at. It's like right at the top of the building. This is where they store all that stuff at. This is their pseudo photo, I think. They're showing this is what it looked like as of November 7th, 2013. It states that TEPCO did not provide enough technical documentation for its water level estimates in the Unit 4 spent fuel pool to enable the committee to evaluate whether those estimates are realistic. In particular, there was insufficient information about the methods used to establish water leakage around the gate seals and total volume of leakage to the pool. These leakage estimates are critically important for obtaining realistic estimates of pool water levels. This is their image of June 29th, 2011 of that spent fuel pool. This is the location of the spent fuel pool. This is headed north. Right there, every wall in the whole building is blown out. International Atomic Energy Agency on March 15th, 2011, it was informed by the Japanese authorities that the spent fuel storage pond at Unit 4 of the nuclear power plant is on fire. They're stating it's on fire, the storage pond. And according to a now declassified report written by the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission on March 18th, 2011, 1 week after the tidal wave hit Fukushima, they're saying that
25% of the fuel in Unit 2 was released, 50% of Unit 3 of the total spent fuel was released,
and 100% of the total spent fuel was released to the atmosphere from Unit 4. Okay, now you know why there's so much confusion over here. All these documents are saying that the spent fuel storage pond went up in fire. It caught fire. That thing would be burned to bits. Reactors number 3 and 4 had low water levels. Spent fuel pools are of significant concern. Reactor number 4 had 135 tons of nuclear fuel in it. March 15, 2011, fire in the spent fuel pool in Unit 4 at Fukushima 1. In the early morning of Tuesday 15th, March 2011, the International Atomic Energy Agency released a statement saying that the Japanese authorities had informed the agency that the spent fuel storage pond at the Unit 4 of the Fukushima Daiichi plant is on fire and radioactivity is being released directly into the environment. Nuclear fuel was in the Unit 4 reactor on 3/11. Now, this person is saying that there is evidence that it was full of fuel at the time of the explosion. Oh, look at that, that's a doozy. Now, this is the only theory I've ever heard of this. There is the hot spot right here. Now, the fuel pool is more towards... That's what this person is trying to say, that I have confirmed that there is no fuel in Unit 4 pool, even the U.S. military. Concern is that Unit 4's pool has been dry for a really long time. If it hasn't done it already, it'll eventually melt through the concrete floor, drop down, hit Taurus, possibly steam explosion. Now they're saying this is the release from the spent fuel pool number 4, which would mean that it caught fire. Yes, number 4 was said to be empty. Here is the peak of the core leaking out of the wall of Unit 4. Let's see what this shows. Hopefully it's here. Oh, whoa, I never seen that before. I don't know if that's a core or not. I never seen a core, so maybe it isn't. Maybe you guys could do with that. Now this is really interesting. I found this tweet that it says, even the U.S. military has confirmed that there is no fuel in Unit 4 fuel pool. Now, I don't know if that means that, what that means. Now, if they mean no fuel, does that mean that it's all burned up? Which is reported. By the way, reporters who questioned that the transparency of the water in Unit 4 pool is unusually high at the TEPCO interview. Well, they just keep repeating it. Does that mean the IWJ was also taking a farce shot? Unit 4 spent fuel pool. They never show actually going into the building through the door. See how it goes to the ground? That's total routine right there of every... I don't want to yell here. This is weird. This is totally fake. If you look at every video of them going into Unit 4, Leslie, all of them, the Cecilia Vega, BBC guy, you look at every one of those, watch what happens. They always go to the floor, and then there's the shot that opens into this number 4 building. Now, I've never seen this video before, but this totally cements it right now that it is a farce, and I will show you what I'm talking about. Watch. When they go into the building, they go right down to the floor, and voila, then they go into, they're there. Watch this. That is so staged, it's pathetic. Alright, now this is the mock reactor then. I am believing that this is the mock reactor. That even in the BBC, Rupert, he says that they built the top in 6 to 9 months. So why couldn't they build this in a 6 to 9 months? The whole fake reactor. I've never seen this video before, but this is alright, they're gonna show down into this. This should be interesting. See this? There's no way. Look at how perfect that stuff is. There's no way that these are the same fuel rods. Look at, they're gonna show you the Now look at, let's leave. Did you see that? Let's leave. And go look down, look on the ground and leave. Watch this. Predictable. Go down. Now they're out. Now they're out the building. That is so fake, it's pathetic. Don't you find it bizarre that all the reporters follow the same protocol? Now watch Cecilia Vega. The camera goes down. And then they appear inside. Every video shows the same way into the building and out. And now I understand why, because 4 does not contain anything. Even listen to what they say throughout this whole thing. They say that the levels are not as low in 4 as the other 3. That's because there's nothing in there.
We're going to go inside and see what kind of progress TEPCO has made on this cleanup. We're inside the building for reactor 4.
Now look what happens when she goes into the building. I think they're using a different camera too. Look up in this part right over here. Something weird is covering the lens. This is not this, they're not going to use the same camera, so something is a little bit fishy with that. Watch. See this up in here? This black part? Something's fishy. It says here, these are not for public disclosure. FOIA document right up there. So let's go into, I typed in Unit 4. It says Unit 4, Zirconian Fire. Conference call with White House in 10 minutes. Right here, I missed this one. Unit 4 refueling outage. Believe had loud noise. Not sure if Unit 2 or Unit 4 or both. Have fire in Unit 4 spent fuel pool. 314. Unit 4 spent fuel pool dry, appears to be on fire. Shelter, winds are going towards Tokyo. Chairman, Jazzco on call with White House. DOE, RAD monitoring. Obama knows. IAEA reported press release that fire and spent fuel pool extinguished on March 14th. Unit 4's fire and spent fuel pool but reported out. Staff believes might have been a zirconium fire. Containment integrity maintained in Unit 4. The source is from Unit 4 spent fuel pool. TEPCO says another fire burning at Unit 4 on the northeast corner. Northeast corner. Helicopter being prepared to fight the fire. Okay, northeast corner. North, south, east, west. North east corner is right in here. State Department has confirmed fire on Unit 4. TEPCO is saying they haven't yet started fire extinguishing Unit 4 fire. Fuel rods have been exposed and generating hydrogen in Unit 4. Some of roof is damaged. 30 rems an hour in area, so it's difficult for personnel. TEPCO is saying they haven't yet started fire extinguishing number 4. Fire on Unit 4 is being reported as fire that may have initiated due to hydrogen gas from low levels of water in spent fuel pool. No indication what is burning. Media indicates fire started and being reported by a TEPCO person that they are not taking actions to extinguish it at this time due to dose rates in reactor building. Fire about 5 hours ago in Unit 4, low in reactor building. That's blanked out. TV also shows smoke rising from the site. March 16th. Chuck's team. This is John. This is interesting. NRC team invited to meeting with TEPCO at 8 p.m. 1 and 2 boiling down. 3 and 4 zirconium water reaction. No spent fuel pool walls in Unit 4, so no ability to retain water. TEPCO discussing dropping sand on Unit 4 spent fuel pool. Says his group will research best approach for Unit 4 spent fuel pool. I don't think I heard this before, that they were going to throw sand down on it. Do you think the walls of Unit 4 spent fuel pool have been blown out because there would be steam radiation if that were the case? Oh, it says they were preparing to enter Unit 4 spent fuel pool. Look at that, 20 to 30 millirems. Wow, there's people still in the control room, they're saying. Okay, here they try to scan all 4 units. They claimed the water was the reflection of water. Don't know if it's steel or water. They know it's steaming. They're trying helicopter drops, which are highly ineffective. No way to have effective cooling it that way. Can't drop enough efficiently into the spent fuel pool. Need to work on quasi-permanent fix on hardpipe system. Need to let Bill and Chairman know that yesterday thought that with explosion structural damage, we really don't know if there is integrity in spent fuel pool. No, it's 5 p.m. yesterday. There was some water because it's steaming, blanked out. They claim it's a special file video that takes special player and software. They're not going to share it with them. DOE is standing with us. Just a split-second shot helicopter flying by. Couldn't tell a thing, Bill. Do we know Unit 4 spent fuel pool? Chuck, we don't even know it is spent fuel pool. Government says TEPCO told him it was a spent fuel pool. We can't tell anything. NRC team best estimates is that there is no Unit 4 spent fuel pool based on images. Unit 4 spent fuel pool stopped steaming, so might be dry 24 hours ago. Japan took images from helicopter, believed it showed water. NRC team could not see water. TEPCO continues to believe water is in the Unit 4 spent fuel pool. NRC team not sure about water in spent fuel pool. Japan is interested in using this approach. Unit 4 debate if spent fuel pool is dry. Commissioner wants more information, wants clarification why U.S. and Japan don't agree with levels of the spent fuel pool in Unit 4. Clarification is that Chuck could not see conclusive evidence of water in the pool based on the photos of the spent fuel pool. We acknowledge that this is not consistent with the Japanese position. March 17th. They're pushing to determine which strategies are viable and successful. Also, how to tell if it's a zirconium fire. Have email says firefighting foam might have worked on Unit 4. Have to shield fuel in Unit 4 so we can get at 1 and 3. Jack, don't even know if Unit 4 will hold water. Unit 4 spent fuel pool has water but uncertain. NRC team cannot tell if spent fuel pool has lost integrity. Assumed 100% melt of fuel in Unit 4 spent fuel pool. Think there is at least a leak or rupture on Unit 4 spent fuel pool. March 20th, TEPCO says Unit 4 has lost water maybe if you put concrete, not a lot, in water. March 20th, focus on Unit 4 spent fuel pool. TEPCO expends Defense Force Fire Department to move in on Unit 4. The issue with Unit 4 drying or not drying, they just grilled us. Concern is that Unit 4's pool has been dry for a really long time, if it hasn't done already. Will eventually melt through concrete floor and drop, hit torus, possibly steam explosion. Would imply pool is dry. Heard on the news TEPCO was focusing on Unit 4. We're attempting to spray water on it, but it's all BS, BS, BS. Oh, that's B5, I'm sorry. Blocked out, blocked out, blocked out. Concerned about Unit 4. Spent fuel pool. Don't know much about the status of Unit 4. Unit 4 had full core offload. If fuel melted after pool went dry, the interacted with concrete worst situation, it goes through and falls down to the rooms below, including torus. Can't discern anything from that. We don't have dose rate, about 4. We have correlated Unit 4 fire with plume measured. If that's the case, then volatiles are already out there.
A fourth reactor is also right now under concern. This reactor was shut down at the time of the earthquake. What we believe at this time is that there has been a hydrogen explosion in this unit due to an uncovering of the fuel in the fuel pool. We believe that secondary containment has been destroyed, and there is no water in the spent fuel pool.
Remember, these nuclear poisons are lethal at the atomic level. There are as many atoms in 1 gram of cesium-137 as there are grains of sand in all the beaches of the world. 1,480 trillion of them, which is 10 to the 12th power, are disintegrating every second, releasing invisible nuclear energy. So this works out to about 1.5 million disintegrations per square meter. You can see how this works then. Long-lived radionuclides, such as cesium-137, are something new to us as a species. They did not exist on Earth in any appreciable quantities during the entire evolution of complex life. Although they are invisible to our senses, they are millions of times more poisonous than most of the common poisons we are familiar with. Because cancer, leukemia, genetic mutations, birth defects, malformations, and abortions at concentrations almost below human recognition and comprehension, they are lethal at the atomic or molecular level. They emit radiation, invisible forms of matter and energy that we might compare to fire, because radiation burns and destroys human tissue. But unlike the fire of fossil fuels, the nuclear fire that issues forth from radioactive elements cannot be extinguished. It is not a fire that can be scattered or suffocated, because it burns at the atomic level. It comes from the disintegration of single atoms. Thus, radioactivity is a term which indicates how many radioactive atoms are disintegrating in a time period. We measure the intensity of radioactivity by the rate of disintegrations and the energy they produce. 1 becquerel is equal to 1 atomic disintegration per second. 1 curie is defined as that amount of any radioactive material that will decay at a rate of 37 billion disintegrations per second. So 1 curie equals 37 billion becquerels.
My name is Martin Fackler. I'm the Tokyo Bureau Chief, and the title, as we just heard, was Challenges and Opportunities After the Fukushima Nuclear Disaster, this crisis management. And the question of what do you tell your public? You know, I mean, do you tell them that there's a serious nuclear accident, or do you play it down? Do you try to cover it up?
A new computer simulation shows how radioactivity is spread around the world. That simulation is based on the scenario in which contaminated air was vented from the disabled number 2 reactor building on March 14th, 3 days after the massive earthquake and tsunami. Computer images showed the radioactive material was lifted 5,000 meters into the air. It was then carried by westerly winds and spread over the Pacific Ocean. The images indicate that on the 4th day after being vented, the substances reached the west coast of the United States, and on the 7th day, they approached Iceland after crossing the Atlantic.
Now, just for context, Unit 4 is the one in the bottom left-hand corner. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, they all had detonations, every one of them. They all had detonations. And Unit 4 was on fire several times. Unit 3, do you think Unit 3 had a nuclear explosion? We're not going to ninny over that stuff because it blew pieces of the rods up to a couple of miles away. Once again, this is only based upon a short release from a single reactor at Fukushima. And as I just showed you, all the reactors. Now, the first 100 hours, that was 120 billion becquerels, just out of that one reactor, see? That's the importance of it. Now I'm going to move up to Unit 4.
It's unknown how great that containment breach is, but it's a very bad thing. And plant worker evacuation began. On that same day was that the Reactor 4 building, Reactor 4 is adjacent to Reactor 3, was observed to be aflame. And this was sort of at the same time that radiation levels were increasing further. There was a lot of suspicion that this fire was in the spent fuel pool. However, since that time, TEPCO has said that there was an oil leak in a water pump and that was what was the cause of the fire at Reactor Building 4. By the way, these fuel pools are 30 feet deep. They're in the reactor buildings, but they're outside the containment. It's okay for their water to boil, but the elements must remain covered. If they uncover, they're likely to overheat. TEPCO says that the fire, or said on one occasion that the fire was extinguished at noon, so that's not very long after. IAEA says that they were informed that the fire was extinguished at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So that's really where things stand.
So Unit 4, that's the one you see straight ahead of you. Now, that detonated, you just heard MIT talking about how it detonated and on fire and everything else. I want you to listen to CBS Seth Dorn. He claims he's inside the same building that you're looking at right now.
The heart of the decommissioning work taking place here in Reactor 4.
At the end of our tour, we were checked for radiation exposure. In 4 hours, I received the equivalent of less than a chest x-ray.
Now, you can't get less than a chest x-ray, okay? Because you're ingesting radioactive particles. You get an x-ray every second of your life. Now, what you're looking at right now, he claims that's inside of there, that those fuel pools are the same. Somehow that fuel pool and this fuel pool can magically exist inside of this, or per se inside of that. Now, you won't see any scaffolding. You're not going to see anybody with cutting torches. You're just going to see Seth with these magic pictures and a roof that looks like Molly Maid put it in there. And you can't get inside of these buildings. And that's Unit 4, they're claiming. And they're also claiming that's Unit 4. What's going on here? They came out in the last couple of months, CBS, CBC, ABC, BBC, everybody, and claimed that Unit 4 was pretty. It was gorgeous. But in reality, it's extremely destroyed.
Becquerels can be counted in living persons because cesium-137, the decay of cesium-137 emits gamma radiation, which passes through the body.
After many months of decontamination and decommissioning work, TEPCO has reached an important milestone, the successful removal of all fuel assemblies from the Unit 4 reactor building spent fuel storage pool. The work was completed on December 22, 2014.
長い作業になるなと思ったんですけども、安全な方向、いい方向に改善をしながら作業を進めてまいりました。
Removing the fuel from the reactor building damaged by a hydrogen explosion was an unprecedented challenge for TEPCO employees.
建築としてこういう仕事に携われたことを本当に光栄に思っております。
It is the skill and commitment of our engineers and workers at every level and of the many other organizations in Japan and from around the world that enabled TEPCO to meet this challenge. The successful completion of the removal of fuel from Unit 4 allows us now to turn our attention to the challenge of removing fuel from the other reactors, Units 1 to 3. With the benefit of the experience at Unit 4, TEPCO will be able to achieve the task even more safely and efficiently.
There are essentially 4 reactors that we are currently monitoring as best we can. They are all at the Fukushima #1 site. 3 of those reactors were operating at the time of the earthquake and were shut down following their normal procedures. We believe that in general for these 3 reactors, they have suffered some degree of core damage from insufficient cooling caused ultimately by the loss of off-site power and the inability of the on-site diesel generators to operate successfully following the tsunami. We also believe that for these 3 reactors that seawater is being injected with reported stable cooling. The primary containment is described as functional. I would also note that for Unit number 2, we believe that the spent fuel pool level is decreasing. For Unit number 3, we believe that the spent fuel pool integrity has been compromised and that there has perhaps been a Zerk-water interaction. Now, in addition to the 3 reactors that were operating at the time of the incident, a 4th reactor is also right now under concern. This reactor was shut down at the time of the earthquake. What we believe at this time is that there has been a hydrogen explosion in this unit due to an uncovering of the fuel in the fuel pool. We believe that secondary containment has been destroyed. And there is no water in the spent fuel pool. And we believe that radiation levels are extremely high, which could possibly impact the ability to take corrective measures. Recently, the NRC made a recommendation that based on the available information that we have, that for a comparable situation in the United States, we would recommend an evacuation to a much larger radius than has currently been provided in Japan. As a result of this recommendation, the ambassador in Japan has issued a statement to American citizens that we believe it is appropriate to evacuate to a larger distance, up to approximately 50 miles.
But the drama of this hour occurring right now in the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. I want to show you some recent pictures. We got helicopters, a helicopter trying to drop water onto one of the reactors at the plant. That is the breaking news. A helicopter spraying water on the crippled nuclear plant. They attempted 4 helicopter drops. Only one of the drops of water actually hit its mark. That is nowhere near what is needed. The spent fuel rods, as we understand, have been exposed now. There is no water covering them whatsoever. That is an extremely dangerous situation. A cloud of radioactive steam preventing earlier efforts to cover those in water. It could be critical because of a dire warning today about the state of one of the reactors. The warning, though, that dire warning did not come from Japanese officials. It came from an American official. So the credibility gap between what the Japanese government is saying and what is really happening. The word now today that we just got about in the last hour or two is that there were attempts by helicopter to pour water onto the plant. Only one of the efforts was actually successful, and then those missions have been called off because of radiation levels. What does that tell you about what's going on in that plant?
Mr. Koide is a long-time nuclear scientist, but he is one of the very rare species, as you know, in Japan. In Japan's so-called nuclear village, because he says he studies the nuclear science, not to promote the nuclear technology, but to learn the danger of the nuclear technology. And since the Fukushima Daiichi accident 4 years ago, Mr. Koide has appeared in thousands of lecture events and interviews. But for some reason, I don't see him much on TV and newspapers. I wonder why that is. But anyway, he's 65 years old, and he has just retired from the Kyoto University, where he has worked for 41 years. 41 years?
Yes.
41 years. And he may be retiring from the Kyoto University, but I am very sure that he's not really retiring. I'm sure he's going to tell us what he's going to do after Kyoto. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Hiroaki Koide.
Thank you very much. I am Hiroaki Koide, former assistant professor of Kyoto University. Thank you, gathering for this place. I'm sorry, I am bad at English speech, so I asked Ms. Takamas to interpret my speech. Let's start my speech. Fukushima Daiichi原子力発電所の
So as you can see from the title of my presentation, 4 years have passed since the Fukushima #1 power plant accident occurred. Since that time, we've received many announcements from the Japanese government and from TEPCO. But my impression is that the announcements are very limited in nature and that they contain many errors. So today I'd like to describe for you the actual situation regarding Fukushima. Over on the left-hand side, we see unit number 4. You can see that the reactor building has been very much destroyed. However, unit number 4 was not operating on March 11th, 2011, so there was no nuclear fuel in the reactor core. So the events that I just described for you for units 1 and 3, in other words, the melting of the reactor core, did not occur for unit number 4. In spite of this, however, for some reason, there was a similar hydrogen explosion, and as you can see, the reactor building was severely damaged. Because the Unit number 4 was not operating at that time of the earthquake and tsunami. All of the fuel was taken out of the reactor core and put into what we call the spent fuel pool. The spent fuel pool, however, as you can see, was on the 4th floor, and it's basically an area, part of the building where there are no longer any walls or ceiling, roof. I know that all of you are aware of the fact that there are many radioactive materials that were emitted by this accident, and that there are many things that we must worry about. However, when nuclear power plants or reactors operate, they produce a great number of different types of radioactive materials. Of them, the one that I think is most dangerous to humanity is cesium-137. I mentioned earlier that the reactor building for unit number 4 was very much destroyed, and the spent fuel pool was exposed to the air and sort of hanging in midair. In the spent fuel pool for reactor number 4, which was completely exposed to the air, there was enough cesium-137 equivalent to 14,000 bombs that were dropped in Hiroshima. I'll say that again. There was enough C-137 in the spent fuel pool that was equivalent to 14,000 hydrogen bombs, A-bombs that were dropped on, Hiroshima. There was a danger at that time that the spent fuel rods in that spent fuel pool might eventually, because they were still continuing to emit heat, that eventually all the water in that pool would dry up. And if the pool water would all dry up, that would create a situation where the spent fuel rods would begin to melt themselves. And that would create a terrible situation where probably people in the Tokyo area would have to evacuate as well. This is not just my personal opinion, but it was actually the opinion expressed in a report by Mr. Kondo, who was the head of the Nuclear Energy Commission at that time. I think many of you journalists in this room may remember that there were some days immediately following the accident where we had self-defense forces helicopters fly above the power plant to drop water onto the plant. And also we had members of the Tokyo Fire Department bring very, very long hoses and try to, again, put water into the plant. But actually what they were focusing on was unit number 4. They had to somehow keep that spent fuel pool filled with water. How they didn't, if they were not successful, they thought Tokyo could be destroyed.
Yes.
So things have continued at Fukushima Power Plant for the last 4 years, and some progress, some not. But you may remember that in 2011, the party in power was the Democratic Party of Japan. You may also recall that in December of 2011, the Prime Minister at that time, Prime Minister Noda, made an official declaration that the accident at Fukushima Nuclear Power Plant number 1 had been brought to a close. The Japanese term is shusoku shita. My reaction on hearing his words were, stop kidding.
Yes.
The reality is that even though 4 years have passed, the accident situation has not yet been brought to a close at all. As I said earlier, the biggest danger that everyone involved was aware of was the fact that the unit number 4, the spent fuel, although it was not operating at the time of the accident, the greatest danger lay with unit number 4, this spent fuel pool. As I mentioned earlier, there was a great deal of cesium, 14,000 times the amount of the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima. That cesium was simply sitting in that pool, and if that cesium were to be released into the air, then that would be the gravest danger that could be presented to Tokyo and to Japan. This was a crisis situation. Something needed to be done about this, and everyone at TEPCO and everyone at the Japanese government knew how serious this situation was, and they truly made efforts to try to deal with this situation. But it was not until November of 2013 that finally the process of removing those spent fuel rods from the spent fuel pool at unit number 4 was begun, and it took about a year. And it was not until 2014 November, a year later, that all of the spent fuel rods were extracted from the unit number 4 pool and moved to a slightly less dangerous common spent fuel pool nearby. I was so grateful and glad that this work was finally done and finished. I was relieved because I thought at last the possibility that Tokyo might have to be abandoned suddenly has at last been cleared. We've been able to discard that fear. Having said this, however, although this terribly great danger was somehow at least overcome for the time being, that does not mean that we're out of a crisis situation at all. As I mentioned, I've so far been talking about unit number 4, but there's another great concern, which is what is the situation regarding units number 1 and 3. As I mentioned, there was a meltdown of the core, but exactly what is the situation within the core, how much has melted, where is the fuel exactly, we do not know. Why do we not know what the situation is in these units number 1 to 3? It's because nobody can go to the site and see with their own eyes, can check with their own eyes. The radiation levels are so high that if a person were to try to go inside, that person would die immediately. Even robots, which are now being employed to try to gauge the situation inside, they are very fragile when it comes to very high radiation levels. All of the robots that have been sent in have not been able to return as a result. I would like to impress upon you that this is an accident of a severity that cannot be imagined anywhere else. In other words, an accident, a terrible thing occurs, you're not able to go, even though 4 years have passed to close by to the site to see what has happened. That kind of a situation arises only with a nuclear power plant accident. There's no other similar situation. So as you can see, we are facing a very, very difficult situation, and the only choice that we have open to us is to somehow keep the situation from getting worse. And the only way that we can do that is to continually keep pumping water into the plant so that there is no overheating. But as you know, the more water we pump in, the more contaminated water, irradiated water we produce. We cannot avoid this terrible situation. Even today, every single day, 300 to 400 tons of contaminated water are being produced. And as a result of great efforts to keep this contaminated water from entering the more general environment, we have people on the site, workers on the site, working night and day to try to contain this. When I talk about the workers who are working night and day to try to contain this situation, I'm not talking about TEPCO employees. There are no TEPCO employees doing that kind of dangerous work. It's not even the subcontractors who are doing this kind of work. It's the subcontractors. There's a level of about 8, 9, maybe 10 layers, and it's the people at the very bottom who are actually doing the work. And it is said that so many commissions are taken from their salaries that they're not even receiving minimum wage. I think you will all recall the terrible situation in Chernobyl in 1986 when they had their nuclear power plant accident. It has been said that anywhere from 600,000 to 800,000 people were called upon to try to deal with that situation. The 600,000 to 800,000 people included actual military personnel, also retired veterans, just general workers, and also it is said some convicts were recruited to take care of this situation. In Japan, would we be able to find that many people to deal with the situation? I do not think that is a possibility at all. In fact, as it is, we're already seeing a large number of foreign workers working at Fukushima. As you know, Japan is now led by the administration, which is composed of the members of the ruling party, the LDP, and also the Prime Minister is Mr. Abe, a man who has very clearly set out as his main priority economic recovery, economic expansion. As a result, he has worked very hard to bring the Olympics to Japan. In order to make the Olympic Games successful, he gave a speech on the international stage where he declared that the Fukushima accident was under control. However, that is not the situation at all. On a daily basis, there are workers on the site who are struggling to somehow deal with the situation, and every day they are being irradiated. And this struggle, this daily struggle of the workers there will continue for years to come, for decades to come. I've been explaining how much the workers on site have been struggling in spite of the irradiation they receive to try to contain the radioactive materials and try to keep the radioactive materials from being introduced into the environment. Having said this, in spite of their great efforts, there has unfortunately already been a great deal of radioactive materials that have been introduced into the environment. Even as we sit here talking today, every single moment, people in this area, centered primarily around the Fukushima prefecture area, are receiving radiation. And this being irradiated, being exposed to radiation situation will continue for years to come, for decades to come, possibly for centuries to come. Real shot of the Fukushima plant.
2号機、3号機、4号機が北から南に並んでいます。その
So this is an aerial shot. You can see units number 1 to 4 on the southern part of the slide, and then up above you have number 5 and number 6. Reactors number 5 and 6 don't come into the news very much. They were very fortunate because one emergency generator managed to operate that day, and so there was no meltdown of the core. However, as you can see, reactors number 1 to 4 have had all of these different problems, and they are a great deal of radioactive materials were therefore emitted into the air. And not only this, as I mentioned earlier, they constantly have to be kept cool. As a result, contaminated water is being produced in great amounts each day, and they are being put into, as you can see in that little square, these tanks. It was TEPCO's idea to somehow contain this water into these tanks. Already 500,000 tons of contaminated water are in these tanks. Although TEPCO is working hard to build tank after tank after tank, there is a limit to how much physical space there is available on this site for building of tanks. So I think in the not too distant future, TEPCO will have to make a decision and say that it will start releasing some of the contaminated water into the ocean. So I should also point out that although they are making these tanks are not really permanent solid tanks, but rather sort of provisional temporary tanks. The reason is that if one were to try to build more sturdy, solid, permanent tanks, it means that during that process, the workers would be irradiated even more. There would be too much exposure to radiation, so they have to just simply manage with these tanks that are available. However, that means that because they were not designed for such long usage, we're seeing all sorts of leaks occur from time to time. And in addition to this, as you can see from the photograph, the reactor buildings, the turbine housing building also was damaged, and as a result, there's a great deal of water that goes through these facilities, and contaminated water, therefore, is leaking throughout the entire facility. In fact, we can look at all of Fukushima #1 power plant, the whole facility, and say it's like a very highly contaminated swamp. So, as you can see from this slide, I mentioned that this whole entire facility was like a swamp, a contaminated swamp. TEPCO last year did some research. They took water samples from wells that were in the facility. And from one of the wells, they were able to get this kind of data. This was in October of last year. Cesium-134, 61,000 becquerels per liter, which is a huge number, record high. And then cesium-137, 190,000 becquerels per liter. And of all of the what we call the beta emissions, 77.8 million becquerels per liter. So what I'm showing you in red, are the actual legally accepted emissions set by Japanese law. And as you can see, it's for cesium-134, it's only 60 becquerels per liter, which means that it's over 1,000 times the allowed limit. So again, with cesium-137, the allowed limit is only 90 becquerels per liter, but it's 190,000 as becquerels per liter that were discovered in this well. So that's over 2,000 times the legal limit of emissions allowed into the environment. And in regard to this terminology, total beta, I believe what they are referring to basically is the strontium-90 radioactive material, and the allowable limit is only 30 becquerels, and you can see it's 7.8 million that was discovered in this well. So it shows you that it's several tens of thousands of times the allowable limit that you are seeing on the site from a well. So again, we are in a very terrible situation. I would even call it a crisis situation. In order to ensure that the crisis does not get worse, the workers on site are working every single day and will continue to work every single day for the foreseeable future, even as they are exposed to further radiation. Although what I've been describing is quite grave, we have an even more serious issue facing us, which is the reactor cores have melted in units 1 to 3. What are we going to do about that? TEPCO and the Japanese government have recognized the problem, and they have said that, and they have put together a plan where they intend, in theory, to somehow pluck the melted fuel from the reactor cores and move them to a safer place where they will be stored and maintained. Apologize for this slide being in Japanese. It's actually a slide that was presented by TEPCO. It presents their plan as to how they will pluck out the melted fuel. As was just explained right here, as he pointed out, on the left-hand diagram, in the very center you have the pressure vessel, and surrounding the pressure vessel in the center you have the containment vessel. And what TIPCO is saying is that inside the pressure vessel, which is that smaller part at the top, in the middle of the diagram, you have at the bottom the melted fuel, and they believe that the melted fuel has gone through the bottom of the pressure vessel and gone all the way down to the floor of the containment vessel, and it's sitting there sort of like in a big lump. So you have that sort of test tube-like round object that he was just pointing out, which is the containment vessel. And the containment vessel was supposed to be sort of the last fortress of defense to protect people from radiation. However, it seems that there has been damage to the containment vessel because no matter how much water you pump in, it keeps not filling up. So, as you can see from how the professor has pointed, at the bottom of the smaller pressure vessel and at the bottom of the larger containment vessel, TIPCO believes that there are lumps of melted fuel, and they have this idea that they are somehow going to insert something from the top of the pressure vessel, go through all the way down to the bottom of the containment vessel, and pluck out all of these lumps of melted fuels. However, if they were simply to try to remove the top of the pressure vessel in a dry state and put something inside, that means the moment they opened it up, there would be a huge amount of radioactive materials that would be emitted into the air. Nobody could go even close. So how is TEPCO going to deal with this situation? They're saying that the first step they will take is to somehow plug the holes in the containment vessel, the larger vessel. Obviously, there must be some damage. So once they are able to repair the sides of the containment vessel, then they will fill it with water. And after the containment vessel has been flooded with water, then they will insert some equipment from above and go through the pressure vessel and also go all the way down to the bottom of the containment vessel and pluck the spent fuel, which they insist is all in a lump. And the terminology that, the description that the professor is using is, it looks like a dumpling. It's all together in a mass. But I believe that this plan that has been presented is simply impossible to realize. The reason for this is that, first of all, the containment vessel does have holes. We don't even have the technology or ability now to even, first of all, determine where the holes are. And even if we were able to determine where the holes are, how can we possibly repair them? We do not have the means to do so, I believe. I also think that if hypothetically one were able to repair the sides of the containment vessel and successfully fill it with water, then even if you were to try to pluck out the melted fuel from above, I think the fundamental assumption of TEPCO and the government that the melted fuel is sitting at the bottom in a nice little lump, like a dumpling shape, I think that is impossible. It's an impossible proposition. What I'm trying to say is that although this picture looks like a neat little situation where all of the spent fuel is put very nicely into two little lumps, I think when one considers the severity of the accident that occurred and all of the explosions and shaking and etc. and damage that occurred, I cannot imagine that all of the every bit of that melted fuel will be sitting nicely in one little lump, but rather if they will have spread all over the place. And it's also possible not only will they have spread horizontally, it could be that some of the spent fuel could actually have gone through the floor of the containment vessel as well. What I've just described is very, very logical for anyone who understands nuclear engineering or nuclear energy. And in recent months, it has come to the understanding of the general public. In fact, this is a copy of a local Fukushima newspaper which printed an article about what I just described. Instead of the government or TEPCO's previous explanation of the melted fuel being in one dumpling nice shape, rather it shows that probably they're spread all over the place horizontally in the area. And in fact, this is the result of some analysis by even government-sanctioned experts. In other words, if TEPCO and the Japanese government try to pluck out the melted fuel from above, they might be able to get some of it, but there is no way that they will be able to get all of it. So I believe that this is, I think fundamentally, the idea of trying to somehow remove the melted fuel from the containment or pressure vessels is simply impossible to realize. And the only possible way we can eventually deal with this accident is to do what was done in Chernobyl, which is to create a concrete coffin or sarcophagus for the facility. However, there was a problem of the spent fuel pool in unit number 4. A similar situation is present for units number 1 to 3. They also have spent fuel pools which are filled with spent fuels, and they also have to be plucked out and removed. Otherwise, we cannot even think about building a sarcophagus or a concrete coffin. So I mentioned how long it took for the spent fuel rods to be moved to a slightly less dangerous place from unit number 4. But in regard to units number 1 to 3, how long will it take for the spent fuel rods to be removed to a slightly less dangerous place? We have no idea. I think TEPCO and Japanese government really do not know how long this procedure will take. So it is only after the spent fuel rods have been removed, safely removed to another place, that a sarcophagus or excuse me, or a concrete coffin can eventually be made. How many years from now will that be done? I cannot even begin to make a prediction. In fact, I probably will not be alive when the project starts. Even if this kind of a concrete coffin or container is eventually made, as you know, with Chernobyl, it's been 29 years since the accident, and the first sort of concrete coffin that they made surrounding the reactor is now aging, and there are cracks and much damage appearing, so they're making another secondary one to surround it. So although the Chernobyl accident was a terrible accident, it only involved one reactor. With Fukushima, we have at the minimum numbers 1 to 3, 3 reactors that are emitting dangerous radiation. So the way to deal with this accident, the work involved in dealing with this accident will take tens of years, hundreds of years. The radioactive materials must be contained on a centuries-based timeline. So far, I've been talking about the future problems that we face, how to contain the radioactive materials in the future. But as I mentioned earlier, some radioactive materials have already, unfortunately, been emitted into the environment. How much? The figures I'm showing you are actually figures that were presented by the Japanese government in a report that they presented to the IAEA. So what I'm going to be showing you is the amount of cesium-137 that was actually released into the atmosphere. So you can see here, I've put a little yellow square that shows you the amount of cesium-137 that was released into the atmosphere as a result of the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima. So the unit of measurement is terabecquerels. For the Fukushima accident, even just with unit number 1, so from 6 to 7 times is the amount of the unit number 1 released 6 to 7 times the amount of C-137 that was emitted by the bomb that was dropped in Hiroshima. And again, I repeat, this is data that is provided by the Japanese government. It was unit number 2 that released the the largest amount of cesium-137 into the atmosphere. Number 3 also released some as well. But taken together, units number 1, 2, and 3 released 168 times the amount of cesium-137 that was emitted by the Hiroshima bomb. I would like to again point out to you, this is simply the amount of C-137 that was emitted into the atmosphere, into the air as a result of this accident. But as I've explained in some detail already, every day more contaminated water is being produced, more contaminated water is being, unfortunately, going into the ocean. The final amount of C-137 that have been emitted into the atmosphere or into the environment as a result of the Fukushima number one plant accident is several hundred times the equivalent of what was emitted by the Hiroshima bomb. And it is an ongoing process. It is not yet finished.
Charlie?
Yes?
Name one bad thing you've done.
Well, I've done bad things. But let's talk about you for a second. Tell me one bad thing that you've done, and it better be evil.
How evil?
Really evil. Like so evil that you would say it was evil. Like it's the fruits of the devil. Evil.
Are you okay? I mean, are you sure that the protective gear that you were wearing from head to toe really protected you?
Becquerels can be counted in living persons because cesium-137, the decay of cesium-137 emits gamma radiation, which passes through the body.
Oh, hi, Jorge. Hi, Alicia. I can tell you my mother and husband have been asking me the same question since I've been back. We kind of laugh. It's been, we've been working on this story, my producer, Nick Capote, and I, for 4 months, and we took 2 different trips to Japan. Yes, we're fine. Thank you for asking. But I'll tell you the precautions that we had to take going inside this plant and even just getting near it was unlike anything I think I could have ever predicted even. You saw the suit. It doesn't really protect you from radiation if it hits your skin or if it gets in your eyes or if you ingest it. Really, it's just to protect you from transporting radiation into areas that are clean within that plant.
You know, Celia, to your point, most journalists have not been allowed into this facility. Why do you think they wanted to open their doors to you?
You know, TEPCO is this... It's the bad guy in this story, right, if you will. They've been made out to be that, and in many cases it's been justifiable. They really bungled this what happened in Fukushima 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years ago now, from not reporting how bad the damage was initially to just repeated missteps along the way. But, you know, the question remains, can we, as the world, trust TEPCO and what they say and the progress that they've made from here on out?
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011, leading to the country's worst nuclear disaster. It was in here where there was that massive hydrogen explosion.
The decay of cesium-137 emits gamma radiation, which passes through the body.
Not 1 inch of skin exposed. The danger here, radiation you can't see or smell.
Which passes through the body.
The threat is all around me. This is Japan's Fukushima Daiichi power plant.
It's really eerie to be here right now.
The site of one of the worst nuclear catastrophes in history.
The closer we get, these things are just skyrocketing.
Now, at the start of an unprecedented and treacherous cleanup, TEPCO has agreed to open its doors and show us the progress they've made.
This is Unit 4 right here, the gray one. As we get closer, these radiation detectors get higher. We're going to go inside and see what kind of progress TEPCO has made on this cleanup. We're inside the building for Reactor 4.
The world is watching, and many fear what lies beneath this murky water.
1,500 highly radioactive fuel rods inside this pool. They've got to move them outside of this reactor into a safer location. Some say that this is an exceptionally delicate, very dangerous dance for TEPCO.
This is a vital first step to decommission the plant. In all, it will take workers an entire year just to clean up this reactor. But so far, they've done it safely.
We were granted rare access because TEPCO, the company that owns the plant, wanted to highlight its progress here after years of criticism. Finally, we suited up in protective gear for our carefully choreographed tour.
This is the reinforced structure that was built around Reactor 4.
The reactor was not in use at the time of the disaster, but a hydrogen explosion blew off its roof and sent debris flying into this pool filled with nuclear fuel. It's here where TEPCO removed debris and is now starting to slowly retrieve the 1,500 fuel rod assemblies stored in this pool. It's a painstaking process that's essential to shuttering the reactor.
All of this work is taking place underwater because the water acts as a shield for the radioactivity.
A hydrogen explosion tore off the roof of this reactor.
At the time, Reactor 4 was not in use, but that explosion sent debris and chunks of concrete into this pool where the nuclear fuel was being stored.
We were able to watch the delicate and dangerous work of removing some of the 1,500 radioactive fuel rod assemblies. If the rods break, they could release more radioactive gases.
I've read an analogy that this is like removing a cigarette from a crushed pack.
Take that analogy, TEPCO engineer Masayuki Ono told us, and imagine that it's like the cigarette in that box is lit.
So you're saying it's even more difficult than that?
I think so.
Ono told us they've removed 15% of the fuel from Reactor 4.
I'm Arnie Gunderson from Fairwinds Associates. It's Thursday, March 31st, and you'll probably notice that this is the second update of a day. Normally I update you every other day. However, some disturbing video has shown up on Ustream that I wanted to talk to you about. First off, a little bit about my background. I used to be an executive in the nuclear industry, and one of the divisions I ran built nuclear fuel racks for boiling water reactors. So nuclear fuel racks are something that I know a little bit about. Nuclear fuel racks look like this. This is a square cans at the bottom of essentially a swimming pool, and each can is designed to handle one nuclear fuel bundle, and that's the glowing thing you see sliding into the can. Now, the wrapper around those cans, it has boron in it, and that's designed to prevent a nuclear chain reaction from occurring in the pool. You don't want a chain reaction to occur in the pool. That should occur in the reactor. Now, what happened at Fukushima was when the whole site lost power, at Fukushima 4, there was no reactor operating. All the fuel had been removed and was in the fuel pool. Now, normally the pools are cooled. However, they lost power, so there was no longer any cooling. It appears that the pools boiled dry. The roof blew off the building. That indicates that hydrogen was built up from something called the Zircaloy water reaction that had to occur at temperatures over 2200 degrees. Now, after that, the Fukushima staff has been attempting to pour water into that reactor. And you can see in this picture that up the side of the building is a hydraulic device. It's actually designed for pumping concrete. That's pumping water up and over the roof and pouring water into the nuclear fuel pool. Well, this picture is undated, but when it was taken, it clearly shows that there's no water in the pool. Now, if you look, there's a green, long green device, and that's the refueling bridge. Normally that glides along on rails above the pool, and the pool is that crystal clear water that you normally are used to seeing. Well, after the explosion, it has collapsed and is lying in the pool. Now, between seconds 33 and 37 on this video, you can see little boxes. And the little boxes are just to the left of that green bridge. The boxes are in air. Those boxes are the top of nuclear fuel racks. They're supposed to be under 30 feet of water. They're not. Now, what that means to me is a couple things. First off, the top of the nuclear fuel is exposed. Perhaps all the nuclear fuel is exposed, but certainly the top is. You can see steam coming up, but not from the top of the fuel. Down further in the cavity, there's steam coming up. So the water that they're spraying in is hitting the nuclear fuel and creating steam, but it's not filling that swimming pool. Now, the water has two purposes, cooling, but also shielding. So that means that the nuclear fuel is unshielded. That emits gamma rays, and the gamma rays go up into the sky, bounce off of air molecules through something called sky shine, and rain back down on the site as a background radiation that's much higher than normal. That makes work on site really difficult, and it makes work on that refueling pool almost lethal. Now, the other thing it means to me is that the nuclear fuel itself is extraordinarily hot, and the plutonium inside can become volatile. Now, I spoke yesterday in the earlier update about cerium being discovered off-site and plutonium being discovered, and the fact that the nuclear fuel pool does not have water in it, to me, indicates that it might be a clean path for those heavy elements to be escaping from the building and being discovered off-site.
So this is really why we've been brought here. Where I'm standing is on top of what used to be reactor building number 4. The whole of this building was blown apart by a huge explosion after the tsunami disaster. But down inside this pool behind me here is still a vast amount of nuclear fuel. You can see it down there beneath the water. More than 1,300 fuel rods. Those have got to come out. They're currently 30 meters above ground level. This whole building is still not entirely stable, so they've got to get those out into safe storage. So the machine they're going to use to lift those fuel assemblies out of the cooling pool is currently being built over behind this white tank here. It's a very complicated piece of machinery which has to do a very, very delicate task to draw these fuel rods out of the fuel pool. They're going to be lifted on this huge crane that has been built over the top of reactor building 4. Remember, this whole building was destroyed by a huge explosion. All of this around me here has been built in the last 6 to 9 months. And the reason why they can do this job here in reactor building 4 is because the radiation levels in this building are relatively low. So when we were back inside reactor building number 4, my radiation monitor was reading about 200, 250 counts per second. But this behind me here is reactor 3, and as our bus drove past it, the radiation reading shot up to more than 2,500 counts per second. And that's the problem. That building and the other 2 reactors as well are still too radioactive for anybody to go inside and start decommissioning.
I found on Twitter a poll on Unit 4 fuel pool. 91% out of 401 say that there is no nuclear fuel. It flew to the environment with the fire explosion, and only 9% people that the nuclear fuels were safely immersed in water. Now here, there's a conversation where they're talking about a lube oil fire, and I like over here where it says, well, I think we're saying we're skeptical that it was a lube oil fire. Well, we know it wasn't a lube oil fire. We know that. That we can take off the table. Yeah, we're thinking the exact same thing. We're all in the same place. We're ruling out lube oil fire. I don't think any of us are buying that. Tokyo Electric Power is pulling out all the stops to show the skeptical world that the troubled reactors at Fukushima, in particular the spent fuel pool atop Unit 4, won't collapse and spill out radioactive fuel during the next big earthquake. On Saturday, TEPCO let a bunch of journalists with the minister in charge of the cleanup into Unit 4 building to take a look for themselves. What did they see? JRT annotates the account. The group suited in a double layer protective Tyvek went into the building and climbed the narrow staircase to get to the pool, which is 11 meters deep. It stretches between floors 3 and 4. The group paused to look at the concrete ceiling under the pool. Very clean with no cracks, the TEPCO guide noted. Then they went to the top of the building to look into the pool itself, though they couldn't see in since it was covered with a white tarp supported by a lattice of blue floats. When the workers lifted the tarp, reporters saw water but not the fuel racks, which were too far below the surface. Now, someone brought the point up that if there was nothing in the reactor cores and they were just in the spent fuel pool, why would there be an explosion? If there was a fire, they would just catch fire. I don't think it would explode, so that's just another tidbit to throw up there. And then also, this is where they ended up putting them, which was temporary storage in these buildings. The storage in... with those fences around it seem to be this little area right over here. And they also put it in this building across from Unit 4. So I'm thinking it's this building right here. Now, are these the casks? Department of State Freedom of Information Act, unclassified. Now, these are the batch of emails from the Hillary Clinton dump during the Benghazi fiasco, and if all you have to do is type in Fukushima and a ton of stuff comes, I'm just going to focus on this one. 2H, to Hillary Clinton. Synopsis of what is new to cause increased concern. Now, what I find very interesting is all these names, who it's being sent to. Look at this one, John O. Brennan. John O. Brennan. This guy knows. I think someone should ask him a couple questions about Fukushima. As clarification for what is behind the greatly increased concern evident in the 4 points distributed to us by the NRC, water levels in the spent fuel storage pools at Fukushima Units 1, 2, and 3 are now reported failing. At Unit 4, total loss of water from the spent fuel pool has been reported. It is being reported that the zirconium cladding of the fuel already is burning in the spent fuel pools of Units 3 and 4. High radiation levels are making it extremely difficult for safety workers to deal with the situation. Even exceed the quantity of radioactivity released at Chernobyl.
U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton visits Tokyo on Sunday and pledges more support to Japan as it deals with the aftermath of the earthquake and tsunami and the ongoing nuclear crisis. In her 5-hour visit, Clinton met with her Japanese counterpart and later with Prime Minister Naoto Kan.
Why is this being downplayed? Is it a liability issue, or do they want to prevent panic? Do you have any ideas why this is being minimized?
I know someone who's very highly placed in the State Department, and the United States government has come up with a decision. And I don't know whether it's influenced by a fear of panic or commercial interests or whatever, but I do know that the United States government, at the highest levels of the State Department, as well as other departments, FDA and on, have made a decision to downplay Fukushima. And I can't speak for the Canadian counterparts, but I will say that back in April, Hillary Clinton signed a pact with her counterpart in Japan, saying that she agreed that there are no problems with Japanese food supplies, and we would continue to buy them. So we are not sampling this material as it comes into the country because our government, the U.S., has made a decision, strategic decision, to downplay it. I don't know if that's because they want to support the Japanese government or whether they want to support the nuclear industry, but I do know that that decision was made at the highest levels of government.
You know, 4 years ago, maybe a little more or less for some of you. This means I've got to get a lozenge. Thank you. I told, but maybe some of you did and you've never wavered.
What my friends had asked me to do was to talk about our worries and about our ability and responsibility to do something about them. We didn't trust government.
This decision was based upon a careful scientific evaluation and the guidelines that we would use to keep our citizens safe here in the United States or anywhere in the world.
Authority figures, or really anyone over 30.
Many Americans are also worried about the potential risks to the United States. So I want to be very clear. We do not expect harmful levels of radiation to reach the West Coast, Hawaii, Alaska, or U.S. territories in the Pacific. That is the judgment of our Nuclear Regulatory Commission and many other experts.
In large part thanks to years of heavy casualties and dishonest official statements about...
Furthermore, The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and public health experts do not recommend that people in the United States take precautionary measures beyond staying informed. And going forward, we will continue to keep the American people fully updated, because I believe that you must know what I know as president.
Why is it that I can show you endless lies, just endless, lie, non-stop. That's your legacy. He's never told the truth once, not a single time. Not one freaking time have they told us the truth. Fabrication, misdirections, misrepresentation, and outrageous, deadly, vicious lies.
I believe in you with all my heart. Yes, I did.
Well, I don't know why that's funny.
I'm sorry.
So I don't think it's funny.
I can give you a blanket answer. The core, I don't know.
Yes?
And one bad thing you've done.
Well, I've done bad things. But let's talk about you for a second. Tell me one bad thing that you've done. You better be evil.
How evil?
Really evil. Like so evil that you would say it was evil. Like it's the fruits of the devil. Evil.
And I would like to ask people to stay indoors. There is no mistake that this is a level that can have an effect on humans.
Everyone on Earth received the equivalent of an X-ray's worth of radiation from the Fukushima accident. This risk is negligible.
I want to be very clear.
I think this is accurate.
And I want to say this to the television audience.
I want to be very clear.
And I want to say this to the television audience.
And going forward, we will continue to keep the American people fully updated, because I believe that you must know what I know as president.
I think this is accurate.
And I want to say this to the television audience.
I want to be very clear.
That I welcome this kind of examination, because people have got to know whether or not their president is a crook.